He thought no one would dare stop him. A grown man pushing through a crowd at Buckingham Palace, shoving a little girl's wheelchair out of the way like she didn't matter. And just feet away, a royal guard stood silent. Until he didn't. What happened next left the entire courtyard breathless. Welcome to Guard Royals, where we bring you true stories that reveal the soul beneath the uniform. If you believe discipline and compassion can live side by side, go ahead and like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and help us reach 1,000 subscribers by hitting that red subscribe button right now. Your support gives us the strength to keep telling these stories that still move hearts around the world. Because today's story isn't just about tradition, it's about the moment a soldier, trained never to flinch, stepped off his line to protect a child. And if you think you know how this ends, stay with us. What this guard did next, no one saw coming. Not the mother, not the man, not the Queen's own security detail, but everyone who saw it never forgot. Let's begin. It was the kind of summer afternoon that made Buckingham Palace glow. Sunlight dancing on the white stone, a soft breeze rustling Union Jack flags overhead. Families lined the railings, cell phones ready, hoping to capture a perfect shot of the changing of the guard. Among them sat a little girl named Amelia, just 10 years old, visiting London with her mother from Chicago. She wasn't like the other children there. Amelia was born with cerebral palsy and used a wheelchair to get around. But what set her apart more than anything was her heart. Ever since she was small, Amelia had adored toy soldiers. She'd watch old documentaries, memorize British marches, and dream of one day seeing a real royal guard. Up close, in that tall black hat and bright red coat. For her, it wasn't about spectacle. It was about bravery. Her mother, a quiet woman with kind eyes and a caregiver's patience, had saved up for this trip for over a year. She wheeled Amelia through the thick crowd, hoping for just one clear view of the ceremony. But as the moments passed, that dream seemed to slip further away. People pressed in tighter, tourists jockeyed for position. And because Amelia was small and seated low, she couldn't see a thing. Her mother whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart, we'll find a better spot soon." But her voice trembled with disappointment. What neither of them knew, what none of the crowd could have imagined, was that just ahead stood a soldier who had seen his share of battles and was about to face a different kind of choice. And in just moments, that choice would change everything. Just beyond the black iron railings, the band was tuning their instruments. The crowd leaned in with anticipation, unaware that down at ground level, behind rows of knees and camera phones, one little girl's dream was slipping away. Amelia tried her best to stay positive. That's what her mom always encouraged. See the good, no matter where you sit. But in that moment, she couldn't see much at all. The backs of tourists, elbows, tall shoulders, and the shuffle of impatient feet. She adjusted the small Union Jack flag in her lap, the one her mom had given her at breakfast. For good luck, her mother had said, tying a red ribbon to the top of it. But even with the ribbon fluttering in the breeze, luck felt far away. People around her talked excitedly about the guards. They don't even blink. They're trained to ignore everyone. They'll arrest you if you touch them. It was all spectacle to them. A photo op, a box to check off their itinerary. But for Amelia, this wasn't about snapping a selfie. It was about honoring something sacred. Strength, stillness, courage, everything she admired in silence. Her mother, meanwhile, was doing her best to stay calm. She had tried 3 times now, gently, politely, to ask the people in front if Amelia could squeeze just a little closer. "She's in a wheelchair," she said each time. "She just wants to see." But each time, her voice was drowned out by chatter and camera clicks. One man, wearing an expensive camera and sunglasses, barely turned his head. "We all want to see Mom," he said flatly, shifting forward even more. The crowd was swelling now, drawn by the first notes of the ceremonial music. The barriers bowed ever so slightly under the press of bodies. A few tourists crouched in front of Amelia without a second thought, blocking what little view she had left. Then came the shove. It wasn't violent, but it was deliberate. A firm hand on the back of her wheelchair, not from someone trying to help, but from the man with the sunglasses and camera bag. He didn't look down, didn't say a word, just pushed the chair a few inches to the side like it was luggage in his way. Amelia gasped, not from pain but from shock. Her mother's voice snapped like a thread. "Hey, please don't touch her chair." The man shrugged. "I need to get my shot. You can move her back." Amelia's hands trembled on the flag. Her mother's eyes flashed with disbelief, but the crowd kept moving. Around them, tourists snapped photos, oblivious or unwilling to intervene. Somewhere ahead, the red coats of the royal guards gleamed under the sun. One in particular stood perfectly still. Sergeant Marcus Bell, rifle in hand, eyes locked forward. He hadn't flinched at the music, the crowd, the shouts. His expression was carved from stone. Amelia looked up at him through the chaos, whispering so only her mother could hear, "Do you think he saw what happened?" Her mother squeezed her shoulder. "I don't know, sweetheart, but he sees more than you think." The tension was building now, not just in Amelia's chest, but in the air itself. The man with the camera had turned smug, glancing toward the guard like he was daring him to react. And still, Marcus Bell did not move. But he saw, and what Amelia didn't know was that this soldier had once served in places where silence could save a life. And he'd learned to read moments, watch for signs others missed. And now, standing tall beneath the weight of his bearskin hat, Marcus had seen enough. Something inside him shifted, and in the next minute he would make a decision no guard is ever trained to make. The guard still hadn't moved. That was expected. Royal guards are trained for stillness, absolute unflinching silence, even when chaos swirls around them, even when someone crosses the line. But the line was being crossed. Again. And again. The man with the camera wasn't finished. After pushing Amelia's chair aside, he planted himself directly in front of her, knees wide, camera raised, blocking every inch of her view. He started snapping shots of the palace guards with a theatrical flourish, clearly enjoying the attention. A few tourists nearby glanced over. Some frowned. A woman in her 60s whispered to her husband, "That's just cruel." He nodded but said nothing. No one did. Not yet. Amelia sat quietly, but her lip quivered. Her small fingers squeezed the flag so tight the pole bent slightly. Her mom knelt beside her now, trying not to cry. "We'll move again," she whispered. "We'll find another spot." But there was no other spot. The crowd was sealed wall to wall, no way in, no way out. That's when the man turned around. With a smirk, "I don't see why you're upset," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "The girl can still see from down there, if she leans a little." Amelia flinched. Her mom stood up, voice shaking. "Sir, please. She just wants to see the guard. That's all." The man raised his eyebrows. "Then maybe don't bring a wheelchair to a crowd like this." Gasps rippled through the front row. A young woman holding her phone began recording silently. Another man nearby muttered, "Unbelievable." But the cameraman wasn't done. He turned back to the guard. Sergeant Marcus Bell, who still stood firm, unmoving, the man began to mock him. "Look at this guy," he jeered, striking a stiff pose with arms at his side. "What a robot. Probably doesn't even know we're here." He stepped closer to the guard. Inches now. The line had been crossed, then trampled. He made faces at Marcus. puffed out his chest, even pantomimed falling asleep on his feet. The crowd watched, silent and tense, unsure of what to do. Security hadn't moved. The other guards kept to their posts. The tourists clutched their phones, frozen between filming and stepping in. Then the man did something that made everyone hold their breath. He turned back to Amelia and pointed. "This is what you came for, right?" he said mockingly, leaning down. "You're not missing much, sweetheart." Then, casually, cruelly, he kicked the side of her wheelchair. Not hard, but deliberate, enough to jolt her, enough to send a ripple of pure shock through the crowd. Amelia gasped and gripped her mom's arm. Her mother stepped in front of her, shaking, shielding her with her own body. The air turned electric. A voice from the crowd shouted, "Leave them alone." Another, "Back off, man." The tension wasn't just thick, it was suffocating, like the moment before a thunderclap. Eyes darted to the guard. Everyone wondered the same thing. Would he move? Could he move? Because if not now, when? Sergeant Marcus Bell hadn't blinked, but behind his stoic stare, something stirred. This wasn't just another provocation. This wasn't someone yelling or crossing a rope line. This was a child being mistreated. And Marcus, combat veteran, soldier, guardian of the Queen's gates, had sworn to protect more than just tradition. He had seconds to decide. He had to follow the rules and do what was right. And then it happened. A shift so subtle you could miss it unless you were watching closely. Marcus turned his head. The crowd went silent. And for the first time in over 100 years of ceremonial duty, a royal guard was about to break rank. Not for country, not for command, but for compassion. For a heartbeat, everything stood still. The breeze seemed to pause. The music faded into the background. The chatter of tourists fell silent. All eyes locked on one man. Sergeant Marcus Bell, standing motionless in his crisp red uniform, bearskin hat casting a shadow across his face. But his eyes, they had moved. A single, almost imperceptible shift of the head, just enough to catch a glimpse of the chaos at his feet. Just enough to show the crowd. He saw. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Did he just look?" Another voice answered, "He moved, he definitely moved." The silence cracked, like thin glass under pressure. Then came the final insult. The man with the camera, still arrogant, still loud, snatched at the tiny Union Jack flag in Amelia's lap. "Here, let me wave this so the statue can see you," he sneered. But his hand never reached her. In a flash, Sergeant Bell stepped off the line. Gasps shot through the crowd. Shutters clicked. A woman let out a stifled cry. The guard, a figure meant to be immovable, untouchable, tradition-bound, had just done the unthinkable. He left his post. One step, then two. The polished leather of his boots snapped against the stone like gunshots. He marched measured, unwavering, directly between the man and the child. No words, no warning. He stopped, towering over the tourist like a monument come to life. The cameraman, suddenly small, stumbled back a step, caught off guard by the sheer presence of the soldier. Marcus raised his left hand, not the one clutching his rifle, but the free one, and extended it outward, palm facing the man. A silent command. Enough. The message was clear. No further. Not today. The man stammered. I was just trying to... His voice cracked, swallowed by the hush of the crowd. But Marcus didn't speak. His face was still composed, his movements calm, but his eyes, sharp, clear, unblinking, spoke volumes. The crowd was frozen in awe. Phones were raised, but no one dared speak. It was as if the very heart of Buckingham Palace had paused to watch. Then the impossible happened. Marcus turned to Amelia. His eyes softened. Slowly, deliberately, he bent one knee, then the other, and with solemn grace, The royal guard knelt beside the little girl in the wheelchair. A sound rose, barely a whisper, like the collective gasp of 100 people holding their breath at once. Mothers clutched their children. Veterans in the crowd straightened their backs, eyes glassy with memory. Marcus laid his gloved hand gently on the armrest of Amelia's chair. He leaned in, just enough so only she could hear. "Are you all right, young lady?" he asked, his voice steady but warm. Amelia, eyes wide with disbelief, nodded. Tears pooled on her lashes, but her smile broke through, small, pure, unforgettable. She lifted the bent little flag in her lap and held it up. "I just wanted to see you," she whispered. You're brave." The guard didn't smile, but he didn't need to. His response was quiet, powerful. "I'm just doing my job, ma'am." Behind them, the man who had caused so much hurt stood paralyzed, unsure whether to run or apologize. No one paid him any mind, because in that moment the story had shifted. The center of attention was no longer the confrontation, but the connection. The girl, a soldier, and a choice that defied every rule but honored every value. And it wasn't over yet, because what the guard did next would turn this simple act of kindness into a moment that echoed far beyond the gates of Buckingham Palace. You could feel it in the air. Something had shifted. Sergeant Marcus Bell remained kneeling beside Amelia. His right hand still gripped the polished rifle, but his left hand rested gently on the armrest of her wheelchair. Not as a soldier, but as a man, a human being reaching across the gulf of tradition. In the crowd, it was like time had paused. Not even the birds overhead dared interrupt. Tourists who moments earlier had fought for camera angles now stood frozen, tears forming in the corners of their eyes. A father lifted his young son onto his shoulders, whispering, "This is something you'll never see again." No one moved, not even the man who had caused all the trouble. His swagger evaporated, replaced with a pale, uneasy stillness. He looked around for support, but found none. People had turned their backs to him, their eyes locked on Marcus and the little girl he'd chosen to defend. And then the silence was broken. A soft ripple of camera shutters echoed across the courtyard. But this wasn't the sound of mindless snapshots. It was reverent, almost sacred, like a cathedral full of people capturing a miracle. Amelia, still wide-eyed, looked up at the soldier beside her. "I really thought they weren't allowed to move," she whispered. The guard gave the barest hint of a nod, his voice calm. Sometimes the right thing means bending the rules, just a little. Her mother, overcome with emotion, covered her mouth with her hands. She had no words left, only gratitude spilling from her eyes. Just then, a second guard approached. The crowd held its breath again. He was tall, with the same black bearskin hat and crimson coat, but his expression was different. Concern flickered in his eyes. Was he here to discipline Marcus? To restore order? To escort him away? For a moment, the kneeling soldier looked up at his fellow guard. Still kneeling, still silent, but bracing for what might come. The second guard paused. He glanced at Amelia, then at the man who had caused the commotion, then back to Marcus. And instead of speaking, he bowed his head. It was slight, barely perceptible, but it said everything. He wasn't here to correct his comrade. He was here to stand beside him. Then, to everyone's surprise, the second guard stepped forward and gently wheeled Amelia closer to the barricade. There she could see every part of the ceremony. The band, the boots, the rifles raised in sync. It was a quiet endorsement, a wordless recognition that some moments are bigger than protocol. Applause swelled across the courtyard, not wild, not frenzied, but warm, human, honest. Veterans in the crowd saluted. Mothers clutched their hearts, and somewhere among the onlookers an elderly woman whispered, "I never thought I'd see a royal guard kneel." Either had most people, but that day, they did. Marcus stood slowly. He gave Amelia a final nod, then turned, back straight, eyes forward, and resumed his position, rifle in hand. Face stone still once again. But everyone who witnessed what happened knew he had changed. And so had they. The man who had kicked Amelia's chair tried to back away quietly, but a palace official intercepted him. There was no shouting, no scene, just quiet justice as he was calmly escorted out, alone. The crowd parted to let him through, but their attention never left the guard. Because what mattered wasn't what had been disrupted, it was what had been revealed. That beneath the hat, the tunic, and the rigid rules stood a man with a heart. And in a world that often forgets, for just one afternoon at Buckingham Palace, kindness stood taller than ceremony. The ceremony continued as flawlessly as ever. Boots struck the gravel in perfect rhythm. Rifles gleamed under the sun. The precision, the tradition, it was all still there. But something was different now. Because even as the guards moved with military perfection, the audience no longer saw just a show. They had seen something real, something rare, something deeply, unmistakably human. And at the center of it all stood a little girl named Amelia, with her bent flag, her bright eyes, and a moment that would stay with her for the rest of her life. As the last steps of the changing of the guard echoed off the palace walls, the crowd didn't rush away like they usually did. They lingered. They clapped softly. They wiped their eyes. Some placed hands on their hearts, and they looked toward the man who had dared to move. Sergeant Marcus Bell never once smiled, never acknowledged the applause, but as he guided Amelia's wheelchair back through the parting crowd, with her mother quietly mouthing the words, "Thank you," his eyes glinted with something unmistakable. Not pride, peace. He had done what needed to be done. Behind them, the tourist who had mocked and bullied was long gone, escorted out without ceremony, without fanfare, forgotten by the crowd he had once tried to dominate. Because the story no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the girl, to the mother who never gave up, and to the soldier who broke 100-year-old rule, not out of rebellion, but out of decency. That evening, the footage made its way online. At first, just a few videos, a few tweets, a quiet whisper on the internet. But by morning, the story had gone global. Royal Guard breaks protocol to help disabled girl. A soldier's heart, the viral moment that melted Buckingham. A little girl, a big moment, a lesson for the world. Comments flooded in from every continent. Veterans saluted him in the replies. Parents of disabled children shared their tears. Strangers called it the most beautiful moment I've ever seen. And somewhere in a quiet flat in London, Amelia and her mother watched the clip again on her mom's phone, her little hands clutching that same Union Jack flag. This time with a smile that never faded. When asked how she felt, Amelia didn't hesitate. "I've never felt more seen." The next day, palace officials released a brief statement. It praised the guards for their discipline and reaffirmed the importance of protocol, but ended with something few expected. In rare and extraordinary circumstances, humanity must rise above procedure. The Crown recognizes and respects the discretion shown in yesterday's event. It was a nod, a quiet one, but a powerful one, because sometimes the smallest gestures break the strongest walls. And sometimes, one man standing still can move the entire world by choosing not to. Final reflection. So, was it worth it? Was it worth it? For a soldier to break tradition, for a single child for one fleeting moment? That's not for us to answer. But if you've ever believed that kindness still matters, even in a world bound by rules, then you already know the truth. Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, give it a like, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Gargoyles. We're on a mission to reach 1,000 subscribers, and every click helps us bring you more true stories of dignity, honor, and humanity where it matters most. Because in the end, what we choose to stand for or kneel for says everything about who we are.